The sun was shining perfectly on what was supposed to be the most beautiful wedding of the year. Richard Whitmore, one of the richest men in the country, was finally getting married to Amanda, a woman from a very wealthy family. Everyone who was anyone had come to this special day. The wedding was taking place at Richard's huge mansion. The house was so big that it looked like a palace from fairy tales. There were beautiful gardens everywhere, with flowers that cost more money than most people make in a whole year. Crystal lights hung from the tree branches, making everything sparkle like diamonds. 300 guests sat on golden chairs, all dressed in their finest clothes. The women wore expensive dresses and jewelry that shined in the sunlight. The men had on suits that probably cost more than a car. Everyone was talking quietly and smiling, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The wedding had just finished. Richard and Amanda had said their vows and kissed. Everyone was clapping and taking pictures. The photographer was busy capturing every moment of this perfect day. Waiters in white uniforms were starting to serve champagne to the guests. But then, something unexpected happened. At the front gate of the mansion, a young man appeared. He looked to be about 17 years old. He was wearing simple clothes, just a clean shirt and pants that had seen better days. But what made everyone stop and stare was what he was carrying in his arms. A baby. The baby was tiny, maybe 6 months old. She was wrapped in a soft pink blanket and seemed to be sleeping peacefully. The young man held her very carefully, like she was the most precious thing in the world. The security guards at the gate immediately noticed him. These were big, strong men whose job was to make sure only invited guests could enter. They had been checking names all day and turning away. Curious people who wanted to see the famous wedding. "Hey, you can't be here," one of the guards said, walking toward the young man. "This is a private event. You need to leave right now." But the young man didn't move. He stood there holding the baby, looking past the guard toward where all the wedding guests were celebrating. His heart was beating fast, but he knew he had to do this. "I need to speak to Mr. Whitmore," the young man said. His voice was quiet but determined. "It's very important. It's about his family." The security guard laughed. "Sure it is, kid. Everyone always has something important to tell rich people. Now move along before I have to call the police." More guards were coming over now. They surrounded the young man, ready to escort him away from the property. Some of the wedding guests near the gate had started to notice the commotion. They were whispering to each other and pointing. But then the young man did something that surprised everyone. He raised his voice so it would carry across the beautiful garden. "Mr. Whitmore," he called out, "you need to see your granddaughter." Everything stopped. The conversations died. The clinking of champagne glasses ceased. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. It was like someone had pressed a pause button on the entire wedding. Richard Whitmore, who had been talking to some important business friends, turned around slowly. His face went from happy to confused to shocked in just a few seconds. "What did that boy say?" Amanda whispered to her new husband. She could see that something was very wrong from the look on Richard's face. The young man saw that he had everyone's attention now. He knew this was his only chance. He had been planning this moment for weeks, but now that it was happening, his hands were shaking. He walked closer to the garden area, still holding the baby carefully. The security guards followed him but didn't try to stop him yet. They were waiting to see what their boss wanted them to do. "My name is David," the young man said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I'm sorry for interrupting your wedding, but I made a promise to someone very special. A promise I have to keep." Richard Whitmore started walking toward the gate. His new wife followed behind him, along with several curious guests. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. David took a deep breath and continued. "This baby's name is Hope. She's 6 months old. And Mr. Whitmore, she's your son Michael's daughter." A gasp went through the crowd like a wave. Michael Whitmore had died 3 months ago in a terrible car accident. He was Richard's only son, and his death had broken Richard's heart completely. "That's impossible," Richard said, but his voice was shaky. Michael never mentioned having a child. David gently adjusted the blanket around the baby, and as he did, Hope opened her eyes. Even from a distance, Richard could see those eyes. They were bright blue, exactly like his son Michael's eyes. Exactly like his own eyes. Michael didn't know, David said softly. He died before anyone could tell him about Hope. The baby made a small sound and moved her tiny hand. She had been so quiet during all of this, as if she knew something important was happening. "I don't understand," Amanda said, stepping closer to her husband. "Who are you? How do you know about Michael?" David looked at all the fancy people staring at him. He felt so out of place in his simple clothes, but he remembered the promise he had made. That promise was more important than feeling embarrassed. "I was taking care of Hope's mother," David explained. "Her name was Lisa. She and I were together, but before that she had dated Michael for a short time. When she found out she was going to have a baby, Michael had already left the country for business. Lisa was too proud to chase after him or ask for help." Richard's face was getting paler by the minute. He couldn't take his eyes off the baby in David's arms. "Lisa was sick during her pregnancy," David continued. "Really sick. I worked 2 jobs to take care of her and save money for the baby. When Hope was born, Lisa, she didn't make it. But before she died, she made me promise something." The wedding guests were completely silent now. Some of the women had tears in their eyes. This was not the kind of story they expected to hear at a fancy wedding. "What promise?" Richard asked quietly. David looked directly at the wealthy man who might be his baby's grandfather. "She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would make sure Hope knew about her father's family. She showed me newspaper articles about you and Michael. She said Hope deserved to know where she came from." Hope started to fuss a little, and David gently rocked her. The movement was so natural, so caring, that it was clear he had been taking care of this baby for months. "I've been trying to contact you for weeks," David said. "I called your office, I sent letters, I even came to your house before. But your security always turned me away. They said you don't meet with people without appointments. But I couldn't get an appointment because they said my story was too crazy to believe." Richard was staring at the baby now. The more he looked at her, the more he could see his son's features. It wasn't just the eyes. The shape of her little nose, the way her mouth curved. It all reminded him of Michael when he was a baby. "Today was my last chance," David continued. "I knew you would be here and I knew I could get your attention. I'm sorry for ruining your wedding, but I had to keep my promise to Lisa." Amanda touched her husband's arm gently. She could see that he was struggling with emotions he couldn't even name. In just a few minutes, this young man had turned their perfect wedding day upside down. But as she looked at David holding the baby so carefully, and as she saw the pain in his young face, she realized something important. This wasn't some scam, short trick. This boy was telling the truth. "Can I see her?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David hesitated for just a moment. This baby was all he had left of Lisa. He had been taking care of Hope since the day she was born, but he had made a promise, and keeping promises was important to him. Slowly, carefully, David walked closer to Richard Whitmore. The crowd of wedding guests watched in complete silence as the teenager approached the billionaire. When David was just a few feet away, Hope opened her eyes again and looked directly at Richard. And in that moment, Richard knew without any doubt that this was his granddaughter. The baby had Michael's eyes, but she also had something else. She had the same little dimple in her chin that ran in the Whitmore family. Richard's father had it, Richard had it, Michael had it, and now Hope had it too. "Oh my God," Richard whispered, tears starting to run down his face. "She really is Michael's daughter." The security guards didn't know what to do anymore. Their boss was crying while looking at a baby, and everyone at the fancy wedding was staring at a teenager who had just dropped the biggest bombshell anyone could imagine. Should they remove David or should they protect him? Nobody had prepared them for this situation. Richard Whitmore wiped his tears with the back of his hand, but more kept coming. He hadn't cried like this since the day Michael died. Now, looking at baby Hope, he felt like his heart was breaking and healing at the same time. "Tell me everything," Richard said to David. His voice was shaky but determined. "I need to know the whole story." David shifted Hope in his arms. She was still looking at Richard with those bright blue eyes, almost like she knew this man was important. The baby reached out one tiny hand toward Richard, and he had to fight the urge to take her right then and there. "It's a long story, sir," David said quietly, "and maybe not the best thing to talk about at your wedding." Amanda stepped forward. She was still wearing her beautiful white wedding dress, but she didn't seem to care that her perfect day was falling apart. "No," she said firmly. "We need to hear this, all of it." Some of the wedding guests had moved closer to listen. Others were taking pictures with their phones, though they tried to be sneaky about it. The waiters stood frozen with their trays of champagne, not sure if they should keep serving or just wait. David looked around at all the wealthy, important people staring at him. He felt like he was in a different world. But then he looked down at Hope and he remembered why he was here. "Lisa and I met 2 years ago," David began. "We were both working at a small cafe downtown. She was trying to save money for college, and I was helping my mom pay rent. Lisa was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, but more than that, she was kind, really kind." Richard listened carefully to every word. He was trying to picture his son Michael with this girl named Lisa. "We started dating, and everything was perfect for about a year," David continued. "But then Lisa got accepted to a fancy art school. She was so excited, but the school was expensive, really expensive, more money than either of us had ever seen." Hope made a little cooing sound, and David automatically started rocking her gently. It was clear he had done this thousands of times before. "That's when she met your son Michael," David said, looking directly at Richard. "He came into the cafe one day driving a car that probably cost more than my mom makes in 5 years. Lisa was working that day and they started talking." Amanda felt her stomach tighten. She could see where this story was going and she didn't like it. "Michael was charming," David said, and there was no anger in his voice, just sadness. "He was handsome, rich, and he seemed to really like Lisa. He told her he could help her pay for art school. He said he wanted to support young artists." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. This sounded exactly like something Michael would do. His son had always been generous, sometimes too generous. "Lisa and I had a fight that week," David continued. "A stupid fight about money and the future. I was jealous that she was going to art school while I was stuck working minimum wage jobs. She was hurt that I wasn't more supportive of her dreams, so we broke up." The crowd was listening to every word now. This was better than any soap opera they had ever watched. "For 3 months, Lisa dated Michael," David said. "He took her to fancy restaurants, bought her expensive clothes, and paid for her first semester at art school. She thought she was living in a fairy tale." Richard felt a mix of pride and worry. Michael had always been generous, but sometimes he didn't think about the consequences of his actions. "But then Michael got that job offer in Europe," David continued. "The big business deal that would make him even richer. Lisa thought he would ask her to come with him or at least promise to come back soon." "What happened?" Richard asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "He left," David said simply. "One day he was there talking about their future together, and the next day he was gone. Lisa found out from a newspaper article that he had moved to London for business." Hope started to fuss a little, and David pulled a small bottle from his jacket pocket. He had come prepared to take care of the baby no matter how long this conversation took. "Lisa was heartbroken," David continued while feeding Hope. "She felt used and stupid. She quit art school and came back to work at the cafe. That's when she and I started talking again." The wedding guests were completely absorbed in the story now. Some of them were thinking about their own past relationships and the choices they had made. "I was angry at first," David admitted. "Angry that she had left me for a rich guy. But when I saw how hurt she was, I couldn't stay mad. Lisa was different after Michael left. Sadder, but also stronger in some ways." Amanda was watching her new husband's face carefully. She could see that he was struggling with learning about his son's behavior. "We got back together slowly," David said. "It took months for Lisa to trust again, to believe that someone could love her without wanting to, change her or buy her, but we worked through it. By last summer, things were good between us again." Hope had finished her bottle and was looking around at all the people. She didn't seem scared or upset by the crowd. If anything, she seemed curious about all the attention. That's when Lisa started feeling sick, David continued, and his voice became quieter. At first, we thought it was just stress from work. But when the sickness didn't go away, she went to see a doctor. Richard felt his heart starting to race. He knew what was coming next. She was pregnant, David said. 4 months pregnant. The doctor said the baby had been conceived right before Michael left for Europe. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. His son had left behind a child and never knew it. All those months Michael was in Europe building his business empire, he had a daughter growing in Lisa's belly. Lisa was scared, David continued. She didn't know what to do. She thought about trying to contact Michael, but she was too proud. He had left her without even saying goodbye. Why would he care about a baby? Amanda found herself feeling sorry for this girl Lisa, even though she had never met her. No woman should have to face pregnancy alone. I told Lisa I would help her, David said, and there was pride in his young voice. I didn't care that the baby wasn't mine. I loved Lisa, and that meant loving her child too. Some of the older women in the crowd nodded approvingly. This young man was showing more character than many adults they knew. We moved in together in Q, a small apartment, David continued. I got a second job working nights at a grocery store. Lisa kept working at the cafe until she got too big. We were scared, but we were happy too. We were going to be a family. Hope was getting sleepy in David's arms. The rhythm of his voice and the gentle rocking motion were making her drowsy. But the pregnancy was hard on Lisa, David said, and now his voice was filled with pain. Really hard. She was sick all the time, and the doctor said she wasn't gaining enough weight. We spent all our money on doctor visits and medicine. Richard wanted to ask why they hadn't asked for help, but he already knew the answer. Lisa was too proud, and David was too young to know how to navigate the world of wealthy people. The last month was the worst, David continued. Lisa could barely get out of bed. I had to quit one of my jobs to take care of her. We were behind on rent, behind on everything, but all that mattered was keeping Lisa and the baby healthy. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the photographers had stopped taking pictures. Everyone was caught up in this young man's story of love and sacrifice. Hope was born on a Tuesday morning in March, David said softly. She was small but perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and those beautiful blue eyes. Lisa held her for about an hour, and she was so happy. She kept saying, Hope, looked like her daddy. Richard felt tears starting again. His granddaughter had been born 3 months ago, and he had never known she existed. But something was wrong with Lisa, David continued, his voice breaking slightly. The doctors tried everything, but she had lost too much blood. She was getting weaker and weaker. Hope had fallen asleep in David's arms, peaceful and safe despite all the drama happening around her. Before Lisa died, she made me promise 3 things, David said, looking directly at Richard. First, that I would love Hope like she was my own daughter. Second, that I would make sure Hope knew she was loved every single day. And third, that I would find Hope's real family and make sure she knew where she came from. The weight of those promises hung in the air like a challenge to everyone listening. Richard Whitmore stood there for a long moment, just staring at the sleeping baby in David's arms. The promises that Lisa had made David make were echoing in his mind. This 17-year-old boy had been carrying the weight of those promises for months, working hard to keep them while taking care of a baby that wasn't even his own. Can I hold her? Richard asked quietly. His voice was so soft that some of the wedding guests had to lean forward to hear him. David looked at Richard, then down at Hope. This was the moment he had been both dreading and hoping for. He had dreamed of this day when Hope would meet her. Real family, but he had also feared it. What if they took her away from him? What if they decided he wasn't good enough to be part of her life? She's very gentle, David said, carefully adjusting Hope's blanket. She doesn't cry much, but she likes to be held close. And she's getting hungry more often now because she's growing so fast. Richard extended his arms, and David slowly, carefully placed Hope into her grandfather's embrace. The moment Richard held his granddaughter, everything else seemed to disappear. The wedding guests, the fancy decorations, even Amanda standing beside him. Nothing mattered except this tiny person who carried his son's DNA. Hope stirred slightly when she felt different arms around her, but she didn't wake up. Instead, she seemed to settle even more comfortably against Richard's chest. It was like she knew she was safe. "She's beautiful," Richard whispered, tears streaming down his face again. "She looks just like Michael did when he was a baby. Same nose, same little mouth." He paused, studying her face. "But she has something Michael never had. She has this peaceful look, like she's already seen more love than most babies ever do." Amanda stepped closer to her husband and looked down at Hope. Despite everything that had happened to her wedding day, she found herself smiling at the sleeping baby. "She's perfect," Amanda said softly. David watched nervously as Richard held Hope. Part of him was happy to see this reunion, but another part of him was terrified. These people had more money than he could ever imagine. They could give Hope everything he couldn't: the best schools, beautiful clothes, a big house, and most importantly, her real family name. "I need to know more," Richard said, still holding Hope but looking at David. "Tell me about these past 6 months. How have you been taking care of her? Where are you living? What's your situation?" David took a deep breath. This was the part he had been dreading. He was about to admit to one of the richest men in the country that he was basically poor and struggling. "After Lisa died, I had to figure everything out on my own," David began. "The hospital bills took all our savings and more. I had to sell Lisa's car just to pay for the funeral. I moved back in with my mom in a small apartment on the other side of town." The wedding guests were listening intently. Many of them had never heard a story like this. A teenager taking on such huge responsibilities. "My mom works 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working at a laundry during the day," David continued. "She's tired all the time, but she's been helping me with Hope as much as she can. She taught me how to change diapers, how to make bottles, how to tell when Hope is sick or just fussy." Richard was rocking Hope gently as he listened. The baby had woken up and was looking around with those bright blue eyes, taking in all the new faces. "I kept my job at the grocery store, but I can only work when my mom is home to watch Hope," David said. "It's not easy. Some nights I don't sleep much because Hope is teething or has a cold. Some days I don't eat much because baby food and diapers are expensive." Amanda felt her heart breaking as she listened to this story. She couldn't imagine being 17 and dealing with so much responsibility. "But I kept my promises to Lisa," David said, his voice getting stronger. "I love Hope like she's my own daughter. I talk to her every day about how special she is and how much her mommy loved her. And I've been trying for months to find you so she could know her real family." Richard looked up from Hope to study David's face. "Why didn't you just call child services? They could have helped you find resources, maybe even found Hope a family that could adopt her." The question hung in the air for a moment. Several wedding guests nodded. They were wondering the same thing. "Because that would have broken my promise to Lisa," David said simply. "Lisa didn't want Hope to go to just any family. She wanted Hope to know her real father's family. She used to show me pictures of your son Michael in the newspaper. She would say, 'Hope has his eyes,' or 'Hope has his stubborn chin.' Lisa died believing that Hope deserved to know where she came from." Richard felt something shift inside his chest. This young man had incredible integrity. He could have taken the easy way out, but instead, he had chosen the hard path because he had made a promise. "There's something else," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Lisa left something for you." He pulled out a worn envelope that had been folded and refolded many times. The edges were soft from handling, and Richard could see that David had been carrying it for months. "What is it?" Richard asked. "A letter," David said. "Lisa wrote it when she was in the hospital, after Hope was born, but before she—" His voice trailed off. "She wrote it for Hope's father's family. She wanted you to know about Hope, and she wanted to explain why she never contacted Michael." Richard handed Hope back to David so he could take the letter. His hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. Would you like me to read it out loud? Richard asked David. Yes, sir, David said. Lisa would have wanted that. Richard cleared his throat and began to read. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, if you are reading this letter, it means that something has happened to me, and David has kept his promise to find you. The crowd was completely silent now. Even Hope seemed to be listening, her big blue eyes focused on Richard's face. My name is Lisa, and I was in love with your son Michael for a short time last year. I know he probably never mentioned me, and that's okay. Our relationship was brief, but it gave me the most precious gift I could ever ask for. Your granddaughter. Richard's voice was getting shaky, but he continued reading. I want you to know that Michael was kind to me. He never made promises he couldn't keep, and he never lied to me about his feelings. When he left for Europe, I knew it was because his business was important to him. I respected that, even though it broke my heart. Amanda was crying now too. She could hear the love and pain in this letter from a woman she had never met. I found out I was pregnant after Michael was already gone. Richard continued reading. I thought about trying to contact him, but I was too proud and too scared. What if he didn't want a baby? What if he thought I was trying to trap him? I decided it was better to raise the baby on my own. Richard paused, wiping his eyes before continuing. But I wasn't alone. David has been my partner in every way that matters. He has loved me and this baby like we were his whole world. If something happens to me, please know that David is not just some stranger. He is the man who held my hand during every doctor visit, who worked extra hours to pay for baby clothes, and who promised to love our daughter no matter what. Hope made a small sound, and David automatically adjusted her position in his arms. I am writing this letter because I want you to know that your granddaughter exists, and she is beautiful and perfect and loved. But I also want you to know that David has been her father in every way except biology. Please don't take her away from him. He needs her as much as she needs him. The letter was almost finished, but the next part made Richard's voice break completely. If you are reading this, it means I didn't make it. Please tell my daughter that her mommy loved her more than life itself. Tell her that she comes from two families who love her, the Whitmores who gave her life and David's family who gave her a home. And please, please let David continue to be part of her story. He has earned that right through love and sacrifice. Richard finished reading and looked up at David, who was crying while still holding Hope protectively. The letter is signed with love and hope, Lisa, Richard said quietly. For a long moment, nobody said anything. The weight of Lisa's words, her love, and her wisdom seemed to fill the entire garden. Then Richard did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He walked over to David and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Son, Richard said, you have shown more character and integrity than most adults I know. Lisa was right about you. Richard kept his hand on David's shoulder for a long moment, and both of them were crying now. The wedding guests watched in amazement as they witnessed something none of them had expected to see. A billionaire being humbled by a 17-year-old's love and sacrifice. Hope seemed to sense the emotion around her. She reached up with her tiny hand and touched David's face as if she was trying to comfort him. The simple gesture made several people in the crowd wipe their own eyes. David, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. I need to ask you something, important, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. David looked up, still holding Hope close to his chest. He was scared of what Richard might ask. Was he going to demand custody? Was he going to take Hope away? What would you say if I told you that I want to help you? Richard asked. Not take Hope away from you, but help both of you. David blinked in confusion. I don't understand, sir. Richard looked around at all the wedding guests, then back at David. This young man has shown me what real family means, he announced to the crowd. He's shown me what love looks like when it's not convenient, when it costs you everything, when it requires sacrifice. Amanda stepped closer to her husband. She could see that he was about to make a decision that would change everything. David, Richard continued, you said you made 3 promises to Lisa. You've kept the first 2. You love Hope like your own daughter, and you make sure she knows she's loved every day. Today you kept the 3rd promise by bringing her to meet her family. Hope gurgled softly as if she was agreeing with everything Richard was saying. "But I want to make a promise too," Richard said. "I promise that Hope will never have to choose between her two families. She doesn't have to lose you to gain us." The crowd murmured in surprise. This was not what anyone had expected to hear. David stared at Richard, not sure he had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want to adopt both of you," Richard said clearly. "Not just Hope, you too, David. You've already proven yourself to be her father in every way that matters. I want to make it official." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible now. Several people dropped their champagne glasses. This was bigger news than any business deal Richard had ever made. "I don't understand," David said again, his voice barely a whisper. Amanda stepped forward and surprised everyone by taking David's free hand. "What my husband is saying is that we want you to be part of our family, all of us together." "But I'm nobody," David protested. "I'm just a kid who works at a grocery store. I don't know anything about being rich or fitting into your world." Richard smiled through his tears. "Son, you know the most important thing. You know how to love unconditionally. You know how to keep promises even when it's hard. You know how to sacrifice for someone else's good. Those are the things that make a real family." Hope was getting fussy, and David automatically started bouncing her gently. The movement was so natural, so practiced, that it was clear he had been doing this for months. "Think about it," Richard continued. "You could finish high school without worrying about working to pay rent. You could go to college, any college you want. Hope could grow up with every opportunity in the world, but more importantly, she could grow up with the young man who has already given her everything." David was overwhelmed. 6 months ago, he had been a regular teenager working part-time and dating his girlfriend. Now he was being offered a life he had never dreamed possible. "I need to think about my mom," David said. "She's been helping me with Hope. She's worked so hard to support us both." "Your mother would be part of this too," Richard said immediately. "Anyone who raised a son like you deserves to be honored and cared for. We'll make sure she never has to work 2 jobs again just to pay rent." The wedding photographer had been quietly taking pictures throughout this entire conversation. He knew he was capturing something special, a moment that would be remembered forever. "But what about Hope?" David asked. "She's used to our little apartment, our quiet life. What if all this wealth and attention is too much for her?" Richard looked down at Hope, who was now reaching toward him with both hands. "She'll have the best of both worlds. She'll know where she comes from, but she'll also know who raised her with love when she needed it most." Amanda had been quiet for most of this conversation, but now she spoke up. "David, can I tell you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "I've been married to your husband for exactly 2 hours, Amanda said with a small smile. "But in those 2 hours, I've learned more about what real love looks like by watching you with Hope than I've learned in years of dating wealthy men who only cared about themselves." The crowd was completely silent now. Some of the guests were recording on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something historic. "Lisa chose well when she trusted you with Hope," Amanda continued. "And Hope is lucky to have someone who loves her so much, but you're both also lucky to have found us, and we're lucky to have found you." Hope made a happy sound and clapped her tiny hands together, as if she was celebrating. "There's something else," Richard said. "Michael left behind a trust fund, money that was supposed to be for his future children. That money belongs to Hope now, but I think Michael would want it used to help the man who saved his daughter's life too." David felt dizzy. This was all happening so fast. A few hours ago, he had been planning to crash a wedding just to get 5 minutes of Richard's time. Now he was being offered a completely new life. "I need to ask you something," David said to Richard. "Why are you doing this? You could just take Hope and give her everything money can buy. Why do you want me too?" Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "Because you've already given her the most important thing money can't buy, unconditional love. Because you kept promises when it would have been easier to break them. Because you worked 2 jobs and went without food to make sure she had what she needed." He paused, looking directly into David's eyes. "But mostly because I lost my son, and I don't want to make the same mistakes with my granddaughter." I spent too much time working and not enough time showing Michael how much I loved him. You've shown me what it looks like to put family first, even when it costs you everything." Hope was getting sleepy again. All the excitement and new faces were wearing her out. David rocked her gently, and she settled against his shoulder with a contented sigh. "What do I have to do?" David asked quietly. "Just say yes," Richard replied. "Say yes to being Hope's legal father. Say yes to finishing school and going to college. Say yes to your mother never having to worry about money again. Say yes to being my son and Amanda's stepson." David looked around at all the wedding guests who were waiting for his answer. Then he looked down at Hope, who was falling asleep in his arms. Finally, he looked back at Richard and Amanda. "Lisa always said that Hope deserved the best of everything," David said softly. "She would want Hope to know her grandfather and to have every opportunity in life. And she would want me to be brave enough to accept help when it was offered with love." The crowd held its breath. "Yes," David said, his voice getting stronger. "Yes to all of it. But only if Hope can grow up knowing the whole story, how much her mother loved her, and how her grandfather found us, and how sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other." Richard stepped forward and embraced both David and Hope in a gentle hug. "Welcome to the family, son." The wedding guests erupted in applause. Many of them were crying now, moved by what they had witnessed. This had started as a society wedding, but it had become something much more meaningful. Amanda joined the hug, and for a moment, the four of them stood together. A new family, formed not by blood alone, but by love, sacrifice, and the keeping of promises. Hope woke up just enough to look around at her new family with those bright blue eyes. She reached out and grabbed Richard's finger with her tiny hand, and in that moment everyone knew that this was exactly how it was meant to be. 6 months later, David Thompson Whitmore graduated as valedictorian from the city's best private school. Hope sat in the audience between her grandfather Richard and her grandmother Amanda, clapping her hands every time she heard David's name. The wedding that was supposed to unite two people had instead created a family of 4, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones nobody sees coming.